Welcome, 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 welcome to this webinar today on the future of live music venues. We're having a chat here today with some Colorado representatives on the National Independent Venue Association, otherwise known as NIVA. We're going to let some folks in from the waiting room and let the room fill up. We have a lot of people who registered to be part of today's webinar. We will be recording it, so if you weren't able to join us live, hopefully you're watching this on YouTube later and getting some good information. So hello to you. This presentation today is being presented through a partnership of a variety of organizations. I'm Meredith Badler. I'm the Deputy Director at the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts, or the CBCA. We are a nonprofit organization based in Denver, but doing work all over Colorado. And our mission is to advance Colorado's creative economy by connecting business and the arts with business. We do advocacy and research and trainings and leadership development, all sorts of arts and business partnerships and engagement, really focused on Colorado's vital creative industries. So that's the work we do. And like many organizations here, we got to work in March and started trying to figure out how we can get through this mess. So this webinar is in partnership with our friends at Levitt Pavilion Denver. You'll hear from them this morning, and their Colorado Music Collective initiative, and also in partnership with the Colorado chapter of NIVA. And that's really what today's presentation will be focusing on. We have three different Colorado music industry professionals that all have volunteer leadership roles with NIVA and are here to give you an update on their work, what they're seeing, what's coming down the pike, and how you all, we have venue owners on watching, we have musicians, we have attorneys, how we can all really band together and truly help save our music industry. We are busy doing what we can, but it's a tough situation out there. So a few Zoom housekeeping items before I turn it over to our moderator, Jesse, who will introduce our three panelists. I mentioned earlier, we are recording today's webinar, so you'll be able to watch it and share it afterwards. You'll get that link via email from my colleague, Rachel, in a few days. We ask that for those of you that are watching live on Zoom to stay muted, to keep your camera off, at least for now. That helps avoid background noise and allows us to really focus on our panelists and help them have a good, robust conversation. But we still want to hear from you. By now, you should know where your chat feature is on your Zoom. Take a moment here as I go through the rest of these points to introduce yourself. Let your fellow Zoomers, webinar watchers, know who you are, what you do. I imagine there's a lot of sort of shared connections on here, and that's a wonderful thing that we can help facilitate. So open up your chat, introduce yourself. That's also how you can ask questions. Jesse and I will be keeping an eye on the chat and we'll be moderating that. There will certainly be time for Q&A. So please don't be shy. As you think of it, put your questions into the chat feature. I encourage you to change your video settings to hide non-video participants. If you go down to video, you should be able to find that, and it's a really simple setting, hide non-video participants, and then also putting yourself into gallery view can help also just focus on our speakers. Finally, we do have closed captioning. We're really excited that we're able to offer that extra level of accessibility. So that's another feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should see a symbol for closed captioning, and you can turn those subtitles on or off as you wish. That is enough of me talking. It is my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator for today's panel, Jessie Witten, who many of you know from Colorado Public Radio, but is also now working at Levitt Pavilion Denver. And she'll introduce our three panelists and facilitate today's conversation. So I'll go ahead and take off my little welcome screen here. Take it away.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm really excited for this conversation today. I actually just moved into live music as my full-time career in March of 2020. So I'm full of dread and questions, so that makes me really qualified to be the moderator today. So I'm happy to be joined by these three incredible people who are working to keep live music alive and well in the future, hopefully, in Colorado. So we are going to be focused on Colorado as much as we can, but NIVA is a national organization, as you might have guessed from the title. And Meredith has already answered the #1 question that I keep hearing is, how do you pronounce it? NIVA, I guess. I think we're going to hear some disagreement throughout the day on that, but NIVA supposedly is how it's pronounced. We're of course joined by David Weingarten. He's the Vice President of Concerts and Events for Z2 Entertainment. We're talking about venues like Fox Theater, Boulder Theater, and many more that you're familiar with. He's also a member not only of NIVA in general, but of a breakout committee called the Emergency Relief Committee. And we're going to hear a lot about that coming up because emergency relief is so important right now. We also have Laura Wilson, who's live music manager for the Bohemian Foundation, which is Washington's and the Armory in Fort Collins. Also works on Bohemian Nights, which is that incredible free music festival that happens in Fort Collins. Also a part of NIVA's reopening task force. And then there's Chris Zacher, who I know well, of course, is a member of Levitt Pavilion Denver. He's the executive director of Levitt Pavilion Denver and took on the role of co-captain of NIVA's Colorado chapter. So we are in really good hands today to learn not only about the Colorado music scene, but how this nationwide group of people is acting as a voice for independent venues that are struggling so much right now. So I want to start with co-captain himself, Chris Zacher. If you could just tell us how NIVA got started, why, and just basically how this whole thing got started. And you're muted right now.
I'm no good at that. I'm always bad with that. Hello, everyone. NIVA was started in March, officially started in March when the pandemic hit. And as we were trying to navigate the early phases of the pandemic, and we start thinking about federal relief and lobbying efforts, the independent venues across the United States, they just didn't have individually the capital, the resources, or the connections to be able to lobby for themselves in a way that Live Nation and AEG can do for themselves, being big corporate conglomerates. So Dana Frank, who runs First Avenue in Minneapolis, kind of spearheaded everything and put everyone together. And now we're I think we're close to 3,000 venues now across the United States that are all working in solidarity. And it's been pretty remarkable. Right now we're doing this work to save our stages and to get some additional federal relief. But so much more has come out of this that, NIVA is going to be an organization that lives on and becomes this lobbying arm and resource bank for independent venues across the United States for years to come.
When you say a number that big, when you're talking about NIVA membership, but that doesn't just have music venues involved, right? I mean, we're talking about the future of music right now, but it also includes comedy venues, theaters, organizations like that.
That's correct. Yeah, we about a month or two after we formed, we invited, as an organization, we started inviting comedy clubs into the realm. And from the beginning, independent, we have a definition of what is an independent venue and what is not an independent venue. So you don't have to be a for-profit venue. You can be a not-for-profit. You can be owned by a government entity. So there's, it's a wide reach so that we could really pull everybody together that didn't have a voice on their own.
Nice. Now, what is like the makeup of the Colorado chapter at this point? So if you have that many people nationwide, who's involved locally?
And we're over 70 venues in the state of Colorado alone, and it doesn't just represent Denver, where the strong concentration of our venues are, or even the Front Range, where David has venues in Fort Collins and Boulder, and also in Steamboat, and Laura has venues in Fort Collins. And that you think of Fort Collins and Denver and Boulder as kind of being the central core of our venues, but we have venues in Pueblo and in Colorado Springs and on the Western Slope and the Gerald Ford Amphitheater, and even Red Rocks is a member of NIVA.
So this is a question for all three. Of course, anyone can answer, and you'll have your own perspectives on really what the answer is here. But baseline question, what is the current status of live music here in Colorado? You know, taking from all of these partners that you're working with in the Colorado chapter, what does it look like right now?
Right now, it's slowly turning back on, but it's a very it's a difficult process right now. You know, we're at the mercy of the governor and, you know, the state and the local health departments and whatnot to sort of figure out how we can open. And so the Boulder Theater in particular, we're just about to open in October, the first weekend of October, but the place holds 1,000, and we're going to be opening at a capacity of 100. And we're going to have to keep the Boulder Theater, the Fox Theater, and potentially the Aggie, but I think we're going to be able to open that sooner than the Fox, because they have a 25-foot barrier. The health department wants a 25-foot barrier around the front of the bands, and so that cuts off the Fox considerably. So if we tried to open the Fox right now, we'd be at a capacity of 36, and that's just not financially feasible. The Boulder Theater at 100, because of the fact that we're including in these tickets, that we're doing all-inclusive tickets with drinks and tacos, McDevitt tacos included, we're able to do it in such a way that people are buying tickets and, you know, table tickets, 25 table tickets at, you know, $4 a piece. So we're able to make it work, you know, knowing that we're going to have that food and beverage money sort of up front, which is, you know, for the most part, a lot of these venues, that's our bread and butter, and that's how we stay in business. And so there's a lot, and in addition to that, there's just a lot of health code and health department things that we need to follow that is a lot different, and, you know, which means more, you know, PPE inventory that we're going to have to keep, which means possibly more security guards to make sure there's not too much intermingling between tables and whatnot, and making sure that everybody's, you know, all of our artists and the staff and the patrons, for that matter, are still safe. So it's definitely looks a lot different and feels a lot different, but the demand is there right now, and people are definitely buying tickets, and they want to come back to see shows and see live music. And we're really excited. Even at where we're at right now, we're incredibly excited to just have shows again and to, like, bring the community back in and get everybody together. So we're grateful for what we have.
Well, it sounds like there is movement now, but how long were your venues shuttered?
We have not had really a penny of income since March 12th. So, and it's September 25th right now, and our first show is October 3rd. So what our days are spent doing is postponing shows, canceling shows, moving shows. You know, some shows we've moved already 4 times. You know, we thought things were going to be coming back. They're not. They keep on getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. Sometimes it's about, you know, even with, you know, local and national bands, you know, just are having a rough time trying to even figure out how they're going to get back on the road. How are they going to get back into a bus with 12 people right now, you know, even after contacting, you know, having contact with local venues and fans and whatnot, and then jumping back on the bus. And, you know, some bands, some people are quarantining, some are not, you know, and, you know, it's very tricky. It's very, very, very tricky right now. And so we're sort of in it for the long haul. I'm not sure if things are going to stay at 100 capacity, or if they're going to be bumping up or coming back down, or, you know, when we're sort of going to be at 100% capacity. But, you know, again, we're just grateful to be sort of where we're at this very moment.
Grateful to exist at this point, I'm sure, in most cases. But Laura, what has your experience been with your venues? Is that a kind of similar story on your end?
Yeah, we've been shuttered since mid-March as well. At this point, we don't have any plans for shows through the end of the year. David mentioned the restrictions with the 25 feet, which is somewhat unusual that we have here in Colorado. So it's really limiting to indoor spaces. And, we also want to make sure that without knowing what this fall and winter is going to hold, that we're, thinking of the community and what could be the safest thing for them. So at this point, we have a show that we've worked on with a local botanical garden here this weekend. So that'll be our first show since March, and probably the only show we'll have in 2020, unfortunately. But I think the short answer is that it's incredibly hard for club venues to be able to make the financials work anyway. David's lucky that at Boulder Theater, he has enough space and can do that. But, for smaller venues, it just doesn't make any sense to have the lights on, honestly. And for us, we're making that as a conscious choice as well, just to wait and see what the public health situation is.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's two major considerations. The first being, can we accommodate these guidelines to put on safe shows? And secondly, is it financially reasonable to take that on? Because for some venues, it just might not even make sense. If you can even make it to hit those guidelines, it just might even put your business at more risk, is what it sounds like. Chris, obviously Levitt Pavilion Denver wasn't able to have a show this season, so you know that very well. Are there any other specific guidelines along with that 25 feet rule that are making it particularly difficult, or can you just explain the Levitt situation a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it difficult for everyone because it's not just this limitation on capacity. There's other components that go into being allowed to open. You have to get approval from the health department. In order to get approval from the health department, you have to meet other criteria. So for instance, with our outdoor venue, if we were to open, we wouldn't even be able to use our bathrooms that are in the building. It would have to all be portalettes. In a pod seating setup, each pod would fit 4 to 6 people, and then would have to be 20 feet distance from the next pod. So when you start trying to lay that over a lawn, even one as big as ours, it becomes increasingly difficult to manage once the patrons are in the venue. And I think David really touched on something earlier that people really need to understand, is that it's not just about Colorado opening up. It's the industry depends on routes. And those tour routes, if there's a break along those tour routes, it's not financially viable for the artist to go on tour, much less financially viable for us to produce shows off of the current terms that we're working under for 175 people. We're in the bar business, and an inordinate amount of our revenue comes from the bar. So that takes masses of people in order to be able to kind of feed the machine.
Wow. So I guess we've answered the question of what the present of music is in Colorado, and it's kind of scary. I mean, we've seen the numbers of revenue losses for the music industry in Colorado in the multiple hundred millions. We've lost about half of music industry jobs in the state of Colorado, and these are all part and parcel to these conversations. So on the positive side of things, NIVA exists and is working to provide relief and assistance in this way. So what are the priorities and challenges to the Colorado chapter of NIVA as we're trying to sort through all of this mess?
The priorities right now are to really push the SOS Act, the Save Our Stages Act. Now, there's 2 acts running through Congress right now. There's the Restart Act, which is a little more encompassing of multiple industry sectors. And then there's the SOS Act that is more defined for live entertainment. And right now, I think as of today, there's a lot of movement in the Senate to kind of hotline this issue through. It's a Hail Mary, but we're hoping that it happens. If not, if our congressional leaders decide to break before the end of October and not come back until January and push through an additional relief bill, the reality is that about 90% of our venues, independent venues, they'll shut their doors forever. So it's a dire situation right now, and this is this call to action really goes out not just to venues but to music fans nationwide, that call your congressional reps and make sure that you're putting pressure on them to support these acts. They only push through bills like this when they see a lot of people telling them they need to. So we need everyone, especially in Western Colorado, to contact their representatives and help with the Save Our Stages Act.
So that was one of the first scary numbers we got from NIVA, is they asked their members, what is the likelihood of you making it through 6 months without assistance? And it came out that 90% of venues said that they would have to shutter if there wasn't any kind of intervention. And I want to get a picture of that in Colorado. I mean, is that true nationally in general? Is that true also in Colorado? Is it better? Is it worse? What's our landscape looking like in comparison?
I don't think the landscape here is any better, any worse than it is anywhere else. We're all kind of, you know, we're all in the same ship that's sinking, and you know, it's not going to get better, and it's not going to go back to any sense of normalcy until there's a vaccine and people take that vaccination. You know, when I'm talking with my cohorts across the country, you know, and we're looking at moving a lot of shows to next summer. And, you know, having a large outdoor venue that doesn't have fixed seating where I can accommodate, you know, a larger crowd, we're still only planning for about 40% capacity. I don't think that nationally any of us think that even by next May or June that we'll be back up to 100% capacity.
So this does sound like an emergency, and that's where David comes in as a member of the Emergency Relief Committee. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in that area of NIVA? What does that look like? What are you guys focusing on? I know that there's work on talking to our legislators, but what do you do day to day as a part of that committee?
You know, Chris had asked me to join the committee some time ago, and so we NIVA wanted to put together a emergency relief fund that's and fundraise around it, so we could in the interim, if a stimulus package or some sort of tax breaks or whatever, if that was going to come into play, we knew that was going to be somewhere further down the line. So in the meantime, what NIVA wanted to do was to try to put together this emergency relief fund so we could offer help to independent venues who, you know, really need the money now, you know, and can't wait for Congress to act, which was smart because, you know, we're still in that, we're still in this big waiting game. So as of Monday, this coming Monday, the application is going to open up for the emergency relief fund, which we worked on as a group. And so there was, I don't know, probably like 15 of us, I think, that were on this committee. And then we separated out into three different areas. It was like one committee was going to work on some guidelines just around the how it was actually going to look and feel and what was really needed. And then I worked on a piece about the grant application, which asks, you know, venues to submit the you know, questions around their financial need, their financial documentation requests, their years in business, additional funding that they might have coming in, and really the type of financial strain that they're currently experiencing. You know, because some people have weathered the storm a little bit better, whether they were, you know, well capitalized or, you know, really on a shoestring budget, and so they could be in a severe situation or sort of like a much more milder strain, although we're all sort of in the same boat. So we're trying to figure out, you know, if those, you know, if people are going to be going out of business or potentially going out of business because they can't make rent next month, you know, they're going to possibly get a little bit more priority than the folks who, you know, might be 9-10 months down the line. So please.
Sorry, I was going to ask, is that something that's open just for NIVA members to apply for?
I
believe so. Chris, is that correct? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's not true. The emergency relief fund opens on Monday, and the application period will go for 2 weeks, and it's open to independent promoters, independent venues, and you do not have to be a member of NIVA to apply.
Oh, great.
You just have to be independent.
Right. And there's some guidelines around that, because we also have a split. There's also a split of how you're going to apply. So the applications are going to look a little bit different between, like, if you're a promoter, but you don't necessarily own a venue, and a venue owner as well. that might not necessarily have a promoter. And then there's another piece to it too, where we split off the committee into distribution. And so how all that's going to be handled with, jurors and and then also how we're going to distribute, if we have 3,000 members or potentially more, if you don't need to be a NIVA member, how that is all going to look once we get the influx of applications, and how we're going to then distribute all of the money. So it's all very complicated, but it's a great thing, and I'm really proud to be a part of that, because it's something that's so very much needed for many, many, many venues.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reality is that, and we have to stress the importance of this point, is that the NIVA Relief Fund is like other relief funds. It is there to help assist you get to the next level. We don't have the ability to raise the amount of funding to float every independent venue and promoter in the United States until we're reopened again. This is really pointed at the hardest hit businesses and the ones that are most important to our communities, whether they're in an opportunity zone or they're serving a BIPOC community. If they're clubs like the High Dive or the Labor Lounge in Denver that really curate young artists. We're all part of this giant ecosystem, and we depend on different size rooms in order for it to operate properly. And the first rooms that we're losing right now are these rooms where people get their start. And those are the ones that we really have to put a lot of focus in to save. When you think about the music industry in Colorado as a whole, we don't just affect people who work in music. You're talking newspapers and Uber and Lyft drivers and restaurants and gas stations and all these ancillary services that go into it. There was a study done out of the University of Chicago last year that showed that for every person who attends a live concert, they produce $12 in economic impact to the surrounding community. So, and in this state, arts and culture is the third largest driver of our economy. So you're not just talking about music venues going away. You're talking about devastating trickle-down effects to our entire economy.
Wow. It looks like Meredith shared a link in the chat if you're interested in more information on the Emergency Relief Fund. And there's going to be an info session about it on Wednesday as well that Lisa's going to share with the group. So that's really cool. Thanks for your work there, David. That's clearly very essential. Laura, the hope is that reopening is going to be a bigger and bigger conversation, but some venues are taking that journey right now to some degree. Can you share your work on the reopening committee?
Yeah, so we started the reopening task force in early May, which seems like years ago, because at the time there was a thought that we would be reopening, and some venues did quickly reopen in June as soon as they were able to. So we had a team of 60 NIVA members and a task force of about 10 of us who gathered as much information as we could at the time about the best, safest practices to reopen, and puts out some resources for the NIVA membership. And to a certain extent, it was used. Unfortunately, once some venues opened, then they ended up closing back down again over the summer. And we've seen that sort of cycle happening throughout the past 6 months. But it's incredibly, we still take in all of that information. We still update the guide. We've had one update thus far. I'm sure we'll have more as time passes. And we've also been able to use that. We have a few of our members and myself are working on a streaming project. So we're using, gathering knowledge and putting that out there. And there are venues that have again reopened across the country. So I talk to people in Hawaii and Texas and Arizona and try and learn from, what they've done, because really one of the best things about NIVA, other than this amazing fundraising effort, is how we've all been able to learn from each other. So this is one of the ways in which we've done it thus far, but we'll continue to, I'm sure, for the next several months at least.
What has been the case in those circumstances where a venue opens and then has to close back down again? Is there some predominant reason why that's happening? Are there any lessons learned?
It was normally because of government changes. So in Texas, for example, we had some venues opening and then Texas kind of shut down their bars again, and now they're reopening again. We've also had, like I said, I spoke to someone in Arizona who opened up and realized that it just wasn't financially feasible. And also they were a great NIVA member who were trying to follow all the guidelines, and everyone around them wasn't, because it was a bit sort of hazy about what the restrictions were or lack thereof. So I think, there's varying reasons, but it's generally down to either laws or financial reasons why that happens.
So reopening is like a multi-staged thing at this point as things change. Do you guys have that final step in mind or a timeline for when reopening means truly back to business?
I think that Chris kind of nailed it earlier when he said that there needs to be vaccine and that people need to take it. And then what I would add on to that is that even when that happens, it's still at least a 6-month process from when that phasing would get to a point of people being able to gather in a larger group. So I wish that I knew what that exact timeline would be, but once we even get to that stage, there's still going to be several months before we can truly gather in the way, or even close to the way that we're used to.
There is one more sort of possible variable that could play into it, and that's the with rapid testing and how that's going to play out. There's a company right now that's working on something that's a breathalyzer. So if that was to come into play and we could utilize that, as people are walking through the door, so all the, we would know just right there, before they walked in the door, if they, were going to get turned away or not. There's also, just the rapid testings that, could be happening earlier on, within that 15 minutes or 20 minutes prior. It comes up on their app. We're checking their, while they're we're checking IDs or checking their tickets. We could also check to see if they're positive or negative. All this stuff is like kind of far out there a little bit down the line, but that's got some promise and might be very helpful for us to be reopening sooner with or without the vaccine in full effect.
Yeah, with what David said, I mean, there's a lot of products that are being tested and they're coming on the market. There's an app that tells you that you have to get tested X amount of days before you come to the show, and then it ties back to the lab, and when you show up to the venue, it says, check mark, you're good. Either you got a vaccine or you tested negative. But most importantly, I think as we look at the future of live music, is that the normal pattern that you're used to going through to get into a venue, it's going to change. You're going to have to give yourself more time. You're going to have to make sure that you've gotten tested, or that you've downloaded an app, or that you're prepared to do what you have to do when you go to the venue. It's not going to be you show up 5 minutes before the headliner goes on and you're scan your ticket and you're in your seat. It's the process is going to change drastically for a long time.
Interesting. So that's the different experience as a music lover and goer. How does the experience change as a performer on the stage as we kind of find ways to work around guidelines and whatnot?
Well, for one, you're seeing when we're talking with artist management about next year and doing shows, these people who normally travel with 6, 7, 8 semi trucks might be traveling with one. You're going to see scaled down shows. I don't think you're going to see those giant productions like you see Tool or Pink or any of these Pepsi Center artists do for a long time, because of the amount of hands and the amount of people that are involved to put that together, multiplied by these adjustments that are going to have to be made to artist contracts, so that the venues aren't losing copious amounts of money to put these shows on.
Interesting. Wow. Well, the future is pretty intense and uncertain. All I want is answers. That's all I've wanted since March, but it looks like we're going to have to remain fluid. In the meantime, what can fans do not only to protect their local music scenes, but to support this weird transitional phase that we're all in?
I think the biggest thing that probably people can do right now is to wear a mask and to continue to just make sure that and stop making it political, put your big kid pants on and just wear a mask. And, and when you're in the venue, wear a mask. And like, that's going to be the least amount of transmission that is going to happen. And that's going to be the way that we save our communities and be able to have more shows. That when you're in the venue, that's a requirement. Obviously when there's eating and drinking, that's one thing, but as you're walking around, you're going to be having to wear one as well. So as long as people can understand that the mask is going to be an important piece of the process for a long time now, I think that's the most on keeping the community safe and being able to get back to some sense of normal. The mask is the most important thing. The next piece is, as we're reopening all of these different venues, is to make sure that you're supporting not only the bands and the venues, and you're supporting the employees and everybody's that have been so just, we've all been decimated for the last 7-8 months. As Chris and I have been talking to a lot of these politicians and Congress people and whatnot, and letting them know, it's like, we're not like the hardware store, that can, when it's on lockdown, you can turn the, put the close sign on, and then, when it stops, you turn it back on and bring everybody back and everything's the same. You can't do that with shows. You can't do that. There's a long lead time. It's a big supply chain, big pipeline, and it takes a long time. And we've had 7 months of that already. And there's a lot of people that are hurting within this industry. So the more people that can support our venues, our bands, our artists, and all the event workers, the more you can support, the better. And we ask you that you come out as much as you can to some of these shows to help show that support.
Is there a way that music fans can engage with NIVA or help in any of the causes that they're specifically working on at the moment?
Yeah, David posted a link earlier in the chat to saveourstages.com, and that's definitely something that people can actively do to support their venues right now. And as was mentioned earlier, contact your Congress people for sure.
Yeah, ask them, and if you are going to call them, please ask them to support the Restart Act and the SOS Act. Those are two of the ones that are in particular, and they both have very much have bipartisan support. So on both sides of the aisle. Obviously, if your congressperson or senator is much more arts oriented, they might be already on there, but you can certainly check. I think if you go to congress.gov and you can check the different ones, you can check the different bills to see who's on board. But if they're not, they should be, because it certainly supports not only the live music industry, but it supports, there's also many other organizations that are hurting because of this as well, like convention bureaus, convention centers and bureaus like that. Like weddings, wedding venues, everything involved in weddings, whether it's florists and whatnot. Like, there's so many people that are just touched by this too, that it's really important to make sure that your voices are heard at saveourstages.com, and also picking up the phone and calling your Congress people.
And I was just going to say, if they're not on the list of supporting us, remember that you can vote soon. So
right.
You register and vote as well.
Oh, there you go.
Headcount.org.
We have an election on November 3rd. Make sure you get out there and vote. You haven't heard about it yet. And I think that, I've done a lot of these Zoom calls and panel discussions over the course of the last 6 months. And I think it's important also to talk about, there is positivity out there. We are getting to a point where, this pandemic is 6 months in, and people know what they have to do. Vaccine research is in progress, and we are going to come out of this. It's important that we save as many venues as we can. It's important that we make sure that Colorado remains a music state, and Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins as music cities. We've built, a lot of us over the course of the past decade have worked really hard to build this music scene into what it is, and we don't want to lose that. We want to keep this momentum going. So, while we're talking about touring artists and big shows and national artists, the thing that we haven't touched on is local artists. If you're a local artist and you're on this call, start getting yourself ready, because when we can open, you're going to be the first people that we call. You're going to be the first people that we book. If it takes David 6 months to get a tour routed for Tedeschi Trucks or somebody else, he's got 6 months to fill. And the opportunity right now for local artists, local and regional artists, is greater than it's ever been. So, you know, get in the studio and start writing some new stuff, and reach out to us. Make sure that you know all the venue owners and the talent buyers in town, and let them know that you're ready to go when we're ready to go.
It does seem that artists have had this really incredible partnership with NIVA. As soon as it started, they've been so incredible in helping the visibility of it. What else can an artist do to help NIVA and independent venues? It seems like they can have a pretty powerful voice in spreading the word.
Yeah, you know, NIVA's got some stuff up its sleeves that isn't necessarily announced yet, and I wish I could talk about it, but I can't. And you know, there's going to be opportunities here in the next 30 to 60 days to really support our causes on a national level. So just stay tuned for those announcements, and it's going to be there's some really cool stuff coming down the pipeline. And I wish I could say something, but I can't.
A little intrigue, nice. Chris, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but there are a lot of unemployed, incredibly talented people from our industry right now. There are a lot of people I'm seeing even in our group today. We have a lot of people studying music industry right now who are going to hopefully join the workforce soon. What is your kind of prediction or thought about the overall industry recovery here in Colorado? Are we going to gain some of these jobs back in the short term, or is that long term? Just generally, what are your thoughts there?
Oh man, you know, I teach at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I teach festival and venue management. And I've got juniors and seniors in those classes that ask me these types of questions weekly. You know, what's going to be available, and you know, is there an industry for me to come back to or to break into? And the answer is there's not right now. You know, I don't know many music promoters and venues who haven't laid off employees or furloughed them. And, you know, those people are going to come back into the fold first. I think we're going to see, you know, probably smaller staffs on the venue side for a while. But the most important thing to do if you're aspiring to work in the music business is to get internships. And internships at venues like mine or David's or Laura's, and get your foot in the door and work really hard and don't say no to anything. And you know, things will open up for you. Opportunity will open up. I wish, like Laura said, she can't tell you when we're going to reopen. I can't tell you when jobs are going to reopen. We've lost, I believe, over 9,000 jobs in the state of Colorado directly related to music this year so far. So if you're new and trying to break into the industry, you know, you're number 9,001. And it's just, I wish I could say something better, but I want to be honest with any of the students who are on this call that, you know, it's going to be a while.
I'll just add something a little more positive, although I totally agree with everything that he just said. But Ticketmaster did a survey earlier this year of willingness to go back into venues and where people were comfortable. And Colorado was like the #1 that people were ready to come back to shows as soon as they possibly could. So when the time comes, you know, the audience is there and this market will be strong. When that is, we don't know, but it will come back.
I would agree with Chris too with the internship piece. I mean, right now we've, you know, when we're up and running and we're, you know, at 100% capacity, Z2 with them in the Boulder and the Fox, we're, you know, around 160 people, and that includes direct event staff. You know, obviously all those people are out of work right now because we don't have any events, and so we're normally an administrative office of about 19, full-time, part-time, and we're down to about 6 people, I'd say. And so we're all wearing multiple hats, trying to, you know, just make things work on a daily basis. It's been crazy, but I think where a lot of the young students who are just coming out of college or who are in college right now, it would definitely help venues quite a bit if we could possibly utilize their resources on an internship level, that would be very helpful, and they could learn in the meantime.
To kind of add to that positive take on, Colorado being a great place for people to jump right back in, we're seeing a lot of destruction. We're seeing a lot of business models in the music industry crumbling right now, but it is also a time of innovation. A lot of us have used the word pivot 20 times a day since this has begun, and a lot of us are doing things we've never done before. David, perfect example with y'all doing those tables and integrating food and having those more evolved kind of events, but there's also a big move towards virtual. And Chris, in talking to your many venues across the state, what kind of innovations have you seen there that could be potential growth in the industry going forward, maybe?
Well, I'm not the biggest fan of virtual concerts, streaming concerts, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. But I think they're a great marketing tool, and David and I have had this conversation before. That they're a great marketing tool. They're a good way to provide opportunity for artists, especially local artists. They're a good way to get people who want to listen to live music an opportunity to listen to something that's new and fresh. But they lack that interaction, that energy that is shared between an audience and an artist, and you're not gonna get that on a screen.
But I can say that we've at Z2 we've been sort of on the forefront of streaming for a while. We invested fiber and cameras, and we have a full production. We have the ability to do like a full production thing at our venues, and so we've been streaming for a while, and we were mainly doing it on sold out shows. When if and when we did sell out, we would put that up with like on various different aggregators like nugs.net or nugs.com. So that worked out pretty well for us. Now, so that set us up for, interestingly, it set us up for being able to do that a little bit. Like this weekend, tomorrow, we have Trevor Hall at the Boulder Theater, and he's doing his album release at the Boulder Theater, with multiple cameras and a very professional shoot. So that'll be on there tomorrow. And then the infamous String Dusters are going to be coming through for 3 nights on October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, I believe. I might be a little off by a day. But they're going to be coming in for 3 nights. We've got a few more other things that are lined up as well. So they're coming into the theaters, and they're doing some beautifully shot and will sound incredible. You're not going to obviously be there, but it's going to be much better and much more professional than the typical Zoom thing that you've seen as of recent. And the artists are actually doing quite well with a lot of these. Some of them are pay-per-view. Those go off with sort of mixed results. But what we found is that even if you do it for free and you have a tip jar, or if it's even like a pay-per-view and you use a virtual tip jar, people really support the artists, quite a bit, and they're starting to make like a pretty decent living. Now, will that translate into when we're back at 100% capacity and everybody just wants to be together like at the Boulder Theater or whatnot? I'm not exactly sure, but I do think that especially for older demographic audiences, like if we have, say, Chris Isaac or Lindsey Buckingham at the Boulder Theater or something like that, and a fan might not be wanting to like risk their health to come out to a show, or they're immunocompromised or something like that, that could be a great opportunity for us to stream a show, pay-per-view or whatnot, whether it's sold out or not.
Yeah, and I think speaking of pivoting, I think there's a really exciting opportunity in what David was saying for people with accessibility issues in the future. Once these things are in place, which they're becoming across the country in different venues, and the ability is there, I think that is a great way to be able to share with live music with people who maybe weren't able to access it previously. So I think that's could be a cool outcome of all of this. And the other thing I would say, not streaming, but I've spoken to somebody who started doing an outdoor series in another part of the country that had never done outdoor before, and had only had an indoor venue, and they actually ended up making more revenue this summer than they had any other summer, because summer is typically a very slow time for indoor venues. So I think that, you know, kind of thinking differently about the business model, there could be some positives that come out of that in the long term.
Nice. Talking about the future as we are, what is the future of NIVA? Maybe Chris, you can give us the idea on that. Like, what are the projects moving forward? What are the focuses as we do begin seeing things change and venues opening? What kind of projects and support is NIVA going to be focusing on?
Yeah, I think we're just starting to have these conversations because we you know, finally after 6 months we see this light at the end of the tunnel. So yesterday, just yesterday afternoon, we had a conversation about, you know, what is the future of NIVA and how do we keep this momentum going in all of these, you know, incredibly bright people across the country who normally don't collaborating with each other. And, you know, I think that's, we'll see how it plays out. You know, ultimately, you know, NIVA would like to build a long-term relief fund so that we can assist venues in times of any kind of natural disaster. So if there's another hurricane and flood in New Orleans, that we can come in and help, or a hurricane in Florida. You know, there's probably opportunities for us to collaborate on a way to get some national tour routes done that we normally wouldn't be able to do, and would allow us to compete with some of the corporate giants a little bit more. We'll see how all of this plays out, but ultimately, you know, NIVA it's here. It's going to be here to stay. It'll be a trade organization for the industry for a long time. And just having a voice at the table in Washington, D.C. for all of these little places, like I mentioned, the High Dive or Labor Lounge, it's huge. You know, Laura and Dave and I, we all have big venues. You know, Dave has some that are smaller, Laura has some that are a little smaller, but we all have access to these big rooms. You know, most independent promoters across the United States don't have access to big rooms. You know, they don't have the funding or the ability to put cameras in their venue, to do live streaming, to take those kind of risks. So I think it's important for people like us who have bigger rooms and maybe are in a little bit better financial situation to be able to go out and try some new things and see how they work long term.
So we're about to wrap up and maybe go to questions, but I do want to get just from the panel just a final thought of silver linings. I loved hearing that from you, Laura, or hope as we move forward as an industry.
I think the work that's been the collective spirit that's been assembled through NIVA is kind of overwhelming when you think about it. I mean, these are 3,000 venues, and many of them were sort of arguing with each other 8 months ago. So the fact that everybody is willing to collaborate and has really worked together as a community for the positive, you know, good of all is something that's really inspiring. And then, as Chris said, it's not going to go away. And I think that independent venues having more power is a good thing in the long term. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think that I would agree with Laura as well. The fact that, you know, there's 3,000 different venues out there that are all willing to collaborate with each other. You know, and even on the weekly meetings, there's a weekly NIVA meeting that hundreds and hundreds of people show up for, you know, that have for over 7 months now, you know, to hear like what's going on. And some of them, and even if you get into like the different committees, like sometimes it's not even sometimes it's like 20 minutes of, you know, some really updated information, but then, you know, we're putting the questions out there. Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's working for you? What's working for, this is working for me. This didn't work. I tried this. And sometimes it's just like a psychology session, you know, where everybody's just kind of just venting, and, you know, and it helps, you know, it helps on a bunch of different levels. So I would definitely agree with that. And I think that my hope is that it stays, that we all stay like that as a collective for a long time. And I think that on a local level, or just on a national level too, like we will be back. You know, it's going to take a while, but we will be back. So I'm very optimistic about that. Just the timeline is what I'm not super sure about.
Need like a magic 8 ball with a timeline generator inside it. You can just shake up. This is when we're opening. It's been fantastic. You know, we're Laura and David and I were competitors. We're friends. We have gone over the past 7 months down this road together, and it's remarkable for me just to see all the positivity that's coming out of the independent side of music. For the past few years, the corporate conglomerates were spending a lot of time buying up independent venues and independent promoters across the United States. And it really felt for a while that was the direction, that everything was going to be corporatized. And if there's any positive thing that's coming out of this pandemic, it's that, you know, the AG and Live Nation are just as affected, if not more affected by this than the independent venues. So the playing field has been leveled. And to have a level playing field where you're part of a network of people who can come together and share resources and share ideas and collaborate. That was the word I was looking for. Collaborate with each other long term in a more positive light. It's going to be better for artists. It's going to be better for music scenes, and it's going to be better overall for all of the independent venues across the United States.
You're here. Thank you all. The future is still unclear, and yet I'm more hopeful and have more information and more tools going forward. So I'm really grateful for that. That's all we can hope for right now is tools and hope. We did get a question from Alex in the chat asking what was the result of Chris's meeting with Polis regarding Denver venues getting capacity variances? Is there an answer to that?
Yeah, you got about an hour and a half? No, it's you know, it's complicated. The answer is that sports teams are in their own bucket, and venues are in their own bucket of reopening. And the reality is that even if we could open at 50 or 60 or 70% capacity based off of what the governor said, it's not safe. And I think Laura or Dave or myself, we don't want to open up our venues and get a bunch of people sick and hurt our community even worse than it's been hurt. So, you know, when we get to that point where people are okay with wearing masks and there's a vaccine available and they go and get it, you know, things will start to change. And it's been really frustrating for all of us. We're watching friends across this state and across this country lose their jobs every day. And some of us have had to lay people off. I know that, you know, David was just talking about all the people at Z2 that have been furloughed. These are not easy decisions to make. These are people that we work with every day, all day long, and blood, sweat, and tears with each other. And, you know, we just got to get this industry back, and we've got to get these people back to work and make sure that they can feed their families and continue on in their careers.
And I think the other thing to take from that meeting too is that, the governor introduced it earlier in that day, was that there's a new COVID dial, so to speak. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. But if you look at this dial, and it's all dependent on the county that you're in, so everybody can kind of look at this dial to find out exactly where you're at. And so if you're at level 2, which is where Boulder is right now, and Denver for that matter, you can have, if you're an outdoor venue, you can have 50% capacity up to 100 if you're an indoor venue, and I think it's 175 if you're out. Now, it all depends on how many COVID cases and how long. There's a bunch of different variables that do go into it. But if you have less, then you can move into level 1, and then I think it goes into protect your neighbors. I'm not looking at it right now. Or it could potentially slide into the other way when things kind of close down. And then there's also within that graph, because it says like something about the guidelines in there, there's also, you know, you can see what, if you're even allowed variances within the county that you're in. And so there have been several variances given, like to the Denver Zoo and Botanic Gardens and whatnot, but not a lot otherwise. And all of those are explained on there as well. So there's a lot of good information on that sheet, and something that we're sort of checking now on a pretty consistent basis to figure out just exactly where we're at and what we can do and what we can't do.
And what we can afford to do. And most importantly, like 175 people in a venue that seats, 7,500 to 12,000 just doesn't cut the mustard. And I think we can say that on the indoor venues as well. Once you start to do your spatial requirements right now, we're just not in a level where we can do much. We're going to keep following these guidelines that the governor put in place. And I know that a lot of us are working together to kind of put together a standardized set of rules and regulations that venues will have to follow when they reopen, because it's important to me that David and Laura and Levitt are all operating under the same set of guidelines, because if we're not operating under the same set of guidelines, the industry is just not going to open back up. So that first and foremost, we all have to get together and advocate for what we can do and how it's going to look moving forward. We can't just, it's not a Taco Bell or a hardware store. We can't just turn the light on. We have to be really careful.
Well, thank you guys. I think we're right at time, and I don't see any more questions coming in, but I do just want to end with this thought that as we've been in this weird space, the thing that I've learned more than anything else is that nothing does replace live music. So that lets me know that there will be a future of live music, and we will all be fighting for it as music lovers. And when we get there, it's going to be one of those essential components to our healing after all of this. And we're going to have to learn how to re-socialize, and I hope to do that with you at a concert. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
SaveOurStages.com.
SaveOurStages.com. We will be sharing this recording with everybody, as well as all of the great links that went in the chat. That will all go out in an email. We can even put that in the description on the YouTube link anyways too. So thank you all. Thank you to all of these panelists for sharing your hard work and also your hope. We all have hope right now. We'll all come back. So thanks everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.